What an honor it is to be here with you. This is a highlight to be with normal people. He actually called me normal. Did y'all hear that? We don't get called that very often in Washington, and it's an honor to be among fellow believers, fellow movers and shakers in our country. I want to just give a huge thank you to Ralph Reed and the incredible job, the vision that he has had in putting together the Faith and Freedom Coalition, Timothy Head, and the phenomenal job that he does and the team that he surrounded himself with, and just the honor for me personally to be able to share with you for a few moments. And really what I'm here to do is kind of set the table. You are in for an absolutely spectacular next few days, and you're going to have the president here shortly. And I know that what was with him just yesterday, and his heart for this country and his leadership could not be more profound or more needed than right now. But I want to kind of set the table for the next couple of days for you and just help us focus on why we're here. There's a lot of reasons why different people come to events like this, but I want to hone it in so that every one of us can gather in and focus on what's at stake and what brings us here. There's really two words, and you already know what those words are. It's faith, it's freedom. That's what brings us here. And the reality is that in American structure, you cannot have one without the other. They go hand in hand. And let me illustrate that for you. We can go multiple different directions with this. But let me go back to the very beginning with George Washington. Many of you have studied his life. But what you may not know is at the end, there were many people in the United States that did not want him to go. After all, we had never had another president, and he was a godly man. He was a man of integrity and faith and did a spectacular job. And there were many people who literally felt like our country could not survive if he were to leave. There were people asking him to be king, to stay permanently. And of course, he refused to do so. But in his farewell address, many of you probably had to memorize portions of his farewell address, but in that, among other things, he said, of all the dispositions and habits that lead to political prosperity, religion and morality are indispensable supports. And then he went on and he said this: in vain would that man claim the tribute of patriotism who should labor to subvert these two pillars of human happiness. In other words, now look, we're about to have July 4th. We're about to have the most patriotic week in our country here in just a few days. George Washington, in essence, said this: you could not claim to be a patriot if you did not understand the role of religion and morality as the pillars of our American system. Where is that today? Now, y'all listen. This is critical. He said they were indispensable supports. In other words, you take these pillars away and everything that our founders gave us collapses if we don't have an understanding of religion and morality in our system of governance here in the United States. So he passes the baton to John Adams. And of course, John Adams made that famous quote that we all use frequently, where he said, our Constitution was written for a moral and religious people. It is totally inadequate for the government of any other. Now listen, we make those comments today and we just kind of brush over them. We run through them rapidly without ever pondering that which our founders gave us, a system that does not work without the indispensable supports of religion and morality. John Adams says it a little bit differently, but using the same words. He says our Constitution was written for a moral and religious people. It's totally inadequate for the government of any other. Now, why would they say that? Why would he say that? Why would our founders put such emphasis upon these two issues? And here, let me just kind of lay this out for you. Let's take what Adam said, our Constitution. What is that? It is, in essence, a contract between us, we the people, and our government. And that contract says that our government is going to have limited influence in our lives so that we can have maximum freedom, individual freedom. All right, that's what the Constitution is. But Adam says that contract, that Constitution, only works within the context of a moral and religious people, and that it is totally inadequate. It will not work without a moral and religious people. Now, y'all understand this. Here's the question. Why? Why would our founders make these types of statements? And let me just lay this out here for you because it totally makes sense. The only way that we can have limited government is when we have people who are capable of self-governing their own lives with an authentic understanding of right and wrong. And that is produced within the human heart by religion and morality. And by the way, when our founders were talking about religion, they weren't talking about religion. Patrick Henry, for example, made it very clear when he said, our nation was founded not by religionists, but by Christians. Not on religion, but on the gospel of Jesus Christ. It's Patrick Henry. In other words, many of you remember when you were a child, you remember somebody say, hey, did you hear about so-and-so? They got religion. You remember that? What were they talking about? Well, so-and-so had an encounter with Jesus Christ and been born again. And so when our founders were talking about religion, they weren't just talking about religion, they were talking about the foundation of a Judeo-Christian worldview. Now, here's the deal. Let me go back to what we're talking about. Our Constitution, faith and freedom. And it's important that those come in order. Faith comprises the indispensable aspects upon which freedom exists. And you pull this carpet out, everything else collapses. It is impossible. It is impossible to have limited government in a secular society. The more we kick God out of the equation, the more we kick God out of the public square, of necessity, the more important government's role becomes in our life. You have two towns, town A, town B. You have this town over here that kicks God out of everything, out of the public square and so forth. What kind of things happen in this town? Yeah, you start getting all kinds of problems. You have violence and crime and more divorces, families falling apart. You have all sorts. And of necessity, the response of government is that they've got to get more involved in town A. There's so many problems. Somebody's got to come in here and address these issues. You have this town over here, on the other hand, that embraces a Judeo-Christian worldview. Not that everyone over here is a believer, but the culture embraces a worldview based upon these things. Like things like the Golden Rule, where we treat each other the way we ourselves want to be treated. These types of what happens, what do you get in this type of culture? Well, you don't have as much crime. You don't have all these other problems. And what is the response of government to this town? Well, they're much less involved. And it is within this context that John Adams says our Constitution was written for a moral and religious people. We must have self-governing people in order to have limited state government. And this is where our role comes into this. Well, it's very important for us to understand this. This is where we have our role. This is the mantle that we carry, that we understand what our nation is built upon. It is faith that creates the ability to have freedom. And apart from this one is impossible. We've got to understand this. So as we are preparing ourselves for the next few days, I love the name Faith and Freedom Coalition because it so summarizes that which our founders gave us. A nation built upon these indispensable pillars upon which everything else rests, apart from which none of it can exist. And so as we are watching the secularization of our country more and more, what we need to realize is now is the time, like never before, for people of faith to be engaged in what's happening in our local communities, in our state, and in our nation. And friends, that's why you're here, isn't it? This is it. We are coming together as a community of believers from all over this country who understand that apart from this part, our country can't go on with the freedoms and all the blessings that we have had if we destroy the foundation upon which it was built in the first place. And so I want to kind of land here. The implication of this for all of us is very personal and very profound because it calls us to engagement. You realize that our country and our system of government does not work without we the people. What a blessing that we have, that we live in a country that not only gives us the opportunity to engage, be it locally or state, federal, whatever, but our whole system does not work unless we get involved in it, we the people. You know, that calls us. It calls us to a great responsibility that we have. And I'm reminded of James Garfield. By the way, James Garfield is the only pastor, the only minister that ever was elected president of the United States. And he was assassinated, but Garfield, everything I've ever read from Garfield is just spectacular. He made this quote, and tell me if this doesn't sound more real today than ever before, or more applicable today than ever before. Garfield said, now, more than ever before, the people are responsible for the character of their Congress. If that body be ignorant, reckless, and corrupt, it is because the people tolerate ignorance, recklessness, and corruption. He went on and said, if that body, Congress, if that body be intelligent, brave, and pure, it's because the people demand these qualities to represent them in the national legislature. Then he said this, if the next centennial does not find us a great nation, it will be because the people who represent the enterprise, the culture, and the morality of the nation did not aid in controlling the political forces. Wow. Now, this is where we're living. So I want to commend you. I want to thank you for being here. I want to thank you for being a part of this phenomenal organization. I want to publicly say thank you, God, for giving us a president who understands these principles that we're talking about. Who is standing for religious liberty like no other president in my lifetime. And for us to be able to say to him, Thank you, Mr. President, for your stand on all these issues that are absolutely indispensable for the well-being of our country. God bless you. God bless you, each and every one, for being a part of this. May this be an absolutely spectacular next few days of your life. And for every one of you, keep the torch ablaze. Thank you for letting me be a part of this for a few moments with you.